Hey, Slider Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Welcome to our special, Biden's First 100 Days. This special is about the executive orders that he signed so far. We have three main categories that we're going to focus on today. First, we're going to talk about the executive orders regarding energy and oil, specifically the Keystone Pipeline. John Kerry now telling these former oil workers to go work in solar panel factories. Right? Maybe they could just hop in his private jet and he'll fly over one of them, and maybe you can apply for a job there. Kidding me? Then we'll talk about the executive orders regarding immigration, and then finally, race, critical race theory. Because not only is Biden, in many ways, Obama 2.0, but he also sprinkles on top of that a bunch of critical race theory and equity and all these super divisive buzzwords and concepts that we've talked about many times before. So energy, immigration, and race. That's what we got coming up on today's show. So first week, what's the latest? We're now at 32 executive orders. And you can see here the other presidents, what they've done. But when Trump signs an executive order, he's an evil dictator, right? When Joe Biden signs an unprecedented number of executive orders, oh, it's wonderful. Look at all the wonderful actions that Joe Biden's taken to help heal the American people, blah, right? How is he able to get away with that? Very simply, the left does not have a moral compass. Now hold on, that's a bold claim. Bear with me here. Hear me out. Maybe I should say something like this. When it comes to politics, people on the left don't view things through a moral lens. That's a little more nuance. But I like the left doesn't have a moral compass. We can run with that too. So I want to steal this analysis here from the wonderful Dennis Prager. And he wrote this essay about Israel and why the left hates Israel, but it can be applied to everything. He says you'd think the left would love Israel. They have full rights for women and gay people and Arab citizens, but the left hates Israel because the left is not guided by a moral compass. What are they guided by? They have three other compi. The first is a power compass. So instead of evaluating people and nations on the basis of right and wrong and good and evil, the left evaluates them on the basis of weak and strong. So if you're weak, you're good. If you're strong, you're bad. Israel is strong, therefore bad. America strong, therefore bad. The Palestinians are viewed as weak, therefore good. See the difference? So a moral lens, you ask, well, who's morally right in this situation and who's morally wrong? Size or strength would have nothing to do with it. But when you have a power compass, size is all that matters. You see it economically as well. The left hates big business. Why? Because they're big. That's all. We're going to talk about oil companies in a little bit. Why does the left hate oil companies? Oil companies provide us with the lifeblood of our economy and our livelihoods. We could do nothing without. We literally could not exist without the oil companies. Why do we hate them? Big. Big means bad. Just put the word big in front of it. So the first compass is a power compass. Second compass, a race compass. The left does not judge people by their actions, but by their race. That's why people on the left say that a black person can't be racist. No matter what they do, you can't be racist. Only a white person can be racist. So it's a power compass and a race compass. And finally, a class compass. Rich people, rich nations, bad. Poor people, poor nations, good. This is Marxism, right? Began with Marx, who viewed the world not based on moral behavior, but on economic class, right? So good and evil, to the Marxist and to Marx himself, good and evil is class-based. So the workers, good. Owners, bad. So for countries, Israel's powerful, white, and rich. The Palestinians, weak, brown, poor. Therefore, good. There's no morality involved, right? No which side is acting morally. It's not even a consideration. And this worldview, it makes perfect sense in our postmodern world where there's no such thing as objective truth, right? If you're a postmodernist, which most people are today, whether they know it or not, they'd say there's no such thing as objective truth. Morals don't exist. Who are you to say what's right or wrong, right? So if you don't have that, You got to fill that void with something, right? If you don't judge people or nations based on their actions and morality, you got to judge them based off something. And here's the three metrics that the left uses: powerful and weak, white, not white, rich, poor. If you are weak, not white, and poor, you are morally good. If you're powerful, white, and rich, you are evil. It's true for nations. It's true for people. For people, it's extra terrible because this thinking actually incentivizes being these things as much as they're in your control, right? Our culture incentivizes people to be weak. In the past, you used to boast how strong you were, right? You're like, I overcame this, and that was admirable. Today, it's, I can't even, I'm so aggressed upon, right? Microaggression. So it incentivizes people to be weak. It incentivizes people to act poor. Whether you actually are poor or not, you act like you have a poor mindset. You show up late, waste your money, unmotivated, et cetera, et cetera. It even incentivizes people pretending to be a different race. Okay, think about how powerful this incentive is if people literally pretend to be a different race, transracial, or at least accentuate the minority part of your ancestry for benefits. Look at Pocahontas, for example. Why did Elizabeth Warren, when she was at Harvard, say that she was Native American? Why say that? Oh, because if you're Native American, are you morally good? No, it's not. That was never a consideration. It was, oh, you must be poor, and you're not white, and you're weak, and you've been victimized. Therefore, good. You're a new professor. Right? See how that works? So keep this in mind all the time, right? It's a framework that's true in every circumstance I've seen since I've heard Prager's analysis of this. And keep this all in mind when you hear more executive orders, and more of his first 100 days, even though during the campaign he said he's not a dictator. I'm not a dictator. I need consensus on the issues. Right? If you're on the left, you talk about unity. They don't talk about consensus. They're talking about you agreeing with me, right? They're not, like, Biden's not interested in finding things that we can all agree on and doing those simple things. Like the other day on the show, we talked about human trafficking, human sex trafficking in America. That's something you think we could all be around against, but no, we're not looking for consensus. We're looking for unity, but unity is very different to the left because unity is about you being silenced or whatever to agree with me. That's their type of unity. And as they're doing these things, if something doesn't make sense, right, you look at it and you're like, that's weird. It's because you're looking at it through a moral lens, right? You're like Keystone Pipeline, which we'll talk about next. You look at canceling the Keystone Pipeline, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any economic sense. It doesn't make any moral sense. We have people whose livelihoods depend on it. Everyone's livelihood does, but people who specifically their livelihood depends on building it and the rest. This is ridiculous. Why would you do that? Well, you're looking at it through a moral lens. He's not. Joe Biden, first 100 days. We'll talk about energy policy next. Spread the word. Hey, Study Crusaders, welcome back to our special Biden's first 100 days. Now, Biden ran, of course, on like being the jobs president, which is ridiculous because the economy was booming at an unprecedented level before COVID hit. But here's Biden promising the world. And here we are now with even just his first few days doing things that are going to result in the loss of many, many jobs, mostly in the energy sector, because of what he said he's going to do with the Keystone Pipeline. Dan Eberhard is here. He's the CEO of Canary. They are an oil field service company. Mr. Eberhard, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here again. So let's talk about the Keystone Pipeline. What is it?
So it's a pipeline that's basically looking to pull oil from the northern U.S. and from Canada into the Gulf Coast region where the refineries are.
How many pipelines do we have currently? I think when people think of a pipeline, they're like, this is the first and the only pipeline we've ever had.
No,
it's going to be a terrible disaster.
We have an awful lot of pipelines. I actually don't know a specific number, but in the hundreds. And these transmission lines are really important. You know, I'd like to say that these pipelines are the safest way to transport oil. So when you don't have the pipeline, then it happens on rail or maybe a little bit via truck. And those ways are both more efficient and more likely to pollute and create problems. So the pipeline is the safest way to deliver energy and the cheapest way to deliver energy.
I'm trying to visualize it. Is it all above ground?
No. It's going to be mostly below ground and probably in the 48-inch diameter type of a size range should it be built.
Interesting. What's the controversy behind it? Is it that it may burst or something?
Yeah, I think that the controversy is that it's helping oil and gas companies, quote unquote, and then also that it's just going to be furthering our reliance on fossil fuels, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, like I said a couple seconds ago, if the pipeline isn't built, it's just going to go on rail, which is where it's been going, and it will reduce our energy infrastructure. So, like for instance, right now, a lot of pipelines are just pointed one direction, from Canada and the northern U.S. down. We don't have the ability to switch course and reverse the flow, which is something that we might need to do for refineries, for war, for any kind of disasters, and we don't have that excess capacity, and that's one of the problems created by not building the pipeline per se.
Oh, help me understand that one. I've never heard that one before. Why would we want to reverse the flow?
Well, because let's say we've got oil and gas in Michigan, but it's better suited for a refinery in Toronto, right? We want it to be able to go both ways. Or let's say there's some kind of a natural disaster, earthquake, tornado, hurricane. I'm just coming up with the stuff, but that takes out a refinery in a certain place, that takes out a supply storage facility in a certain place. We have the ability to, we want the ability to move stuff around, but mostly we want cheap, reliable energy. And the pipeline is definitely the safest way and definitely the cheapest way. So this is really just a political football. And it really is a quite a conundrum for the Democrat Party, because the Democrats basically have to choose between the green activists that only kind of know what they're talking about with regards to the pipeline and and the impact it's going to cause, and the unions. And they've clearly chosen against the unions. This pipeline would create about 1 million good-paying union jobs for 24 months. And the unions are absolutely furious at this executive order and think it's overreaching and destructive. And then for consumers, it inherently pushes up energy costs. So to me, this is Biden, he campaigned that he was going to govern reasonably and from the center. And these executive orders just in general, and specifically with energy, are just, piling on, appeasing the far left with little regard for what it's going to do to the cost for consumers.
We've seen the side-by-side tweets of the unions supporting Joe Biden during the campaign and then sending out these tweets saying, wait a second, this is not what we voted for. Yeah, but what did they think was going to happen? We've been hearing about the Keystone Pipeline, I feel like, for decades. How much of this thing is built? Is any of it built yet at all?
A little bit of it is built, and I personally think they should have called it the Dakota something instead of the Keystone Pipeline, and really emphasize the North Dakota aspect of it rather than the Canadian aspect of it. Might have helped with the marketing. But look, this has been studied for 10 years. Hillary Clinton was babbling about this, many, many years ago. The pipeline's been through a 10-year environmental feasibility study. This thing is ready to go, and this is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's just virtue signaling to what Biden thinks is his base. Remember, during the campaign, the whole controversy over fracking in Pennsylvania, and he was for it before he was against it, before he was for it. He was on, three sides of a two-sided piece of wood there. So I think that Biden is really tying himself in a knot, trying to protect consumers, trying to work with unions, but also trying to make these environmentalists and their unreasonable expectations happy. And the whole thing works against consumers and works against American jobs.
On the fracking, we've talked a lot about the safety of fracking and how the environmentalists are so concerned that it's going to affect the water or something. I don't even know what it has never, ever once ever has it affected the water at all, ever, of all the fracking we've ever done. It's a zero issue. It's not even it happens rarely.
It literally is a smokescreen. Look, the water table is 800, 1,200 feet. Not something I'm an expert on, and usually you're drilling in the 5,000 to 10,000 foot range. So you've really got a concrete barrier that's 4 inches that really protects the water table. And again, look, nobody in the oil business wants bad water in their community where they're living in and working in either, right? Everybody wants clean water. No one is out to destroy the water in the oil and gas business. This is all just a bunch of folks that don't really know what they're talking about, throwing rocks at who they think the bad guy is. This to me is a bunch of nonsense and malarkey, to use Joe Biden's word.
It's got to be difficult being in the oil industry in America when so much gets swung back and forth based on who's in the White House. Isn't that frustrating?
Yeah, no, these executive orders and, this 60-day moratorium on drilling, and then, Biden's for fracking and against fracking and sort of for fracking, with the debate and the aftermath with what was going on in Pennsylvania. So it's extremely difficult to plan, and ultimately it just makes you more reluctant to hire folks, and it makes you, it makes energy costs for consumers go up. And that's what, I've always thought that this banning fracking, it's an applause line in a Democratic primary. If you ask consumers if they want their energy prices to go up to not have fracking in 4 or 5 parts of the country, the answer is a resounding no.
Of course. But they don't think that far, right? And then they think, well, we'll just have more solar. So we don't spend the rest of the time on solar and these other renewables, which is not, they're not. But what's your take on that? Can that ever, give us the proper perspective, can the renewables ever replace what we have?
I mean, eventually maybe. And look, I want a greener future too. I want a lower carbon future too. And I support those things in the abstract, but we've also got to look at the cost to consumers in the short term, what the government can afford to do. And then I'm a big believer in that the free market will solve. Look, we chose the iPhone over the BlackBerry because the iPhone was better, right? And if we're going to choose solar or wind over oil and gas, or electric cars over gasoline powered cars, it's got to be because they were better, not because the government forced us to do it and the government wasted a bunch of money trying to impose a preference on top of consumers. Again, I think it's something that's got to be chosen, not mandated.
Help us understand the trickle-down effect of banning whether the pipeline or fracking, or you mentioned the 60-day moratorium on federal lands, whatever. Even though he said, I will not ban fracking. And here, right? So it's easy to say I'm against this or we pass this order, but how many jobs are affected all the way down to the bottom?
Oh, well, the U.S. oil and gas industry employs something like 4 million people in America. And I think if you ban fracking, you could be looking at losing, 800,000, 1 million jobs, a lot of them in Pennsylvania, a lot of them in Texas, a lot of them in North Dakota. But the cost to consumers is going to be, hey, do you want to pay 50 cents more at the pump? Do you want to pay $12 more for the plane ticket? And these are real costs that I think that we, don't need. We're also going to take, if we don't drill the oil here, it's going to be drilled somewhere else in the world where their environmental standards and their they're environmentally more careless and reckless than we are here. Don't care as much. So I think we want the jobs in America, and I think we want American standards, and I think we want lower fuel costs. So to me, it makes an awful lot of sense. I agree we need to be able to transition to a lower carbon footprint over time, but it needs to be done in a way that makes sense, not in a foolhardy way that pushes jobs overseas.
And I think you mentioned all that, and I think of how many wars have been fought around oil, and we have it right here. It's insane. I certainly Trump's ending wars and not starting any new ones, a lot of that had to come from the fact that we're more energy independent than ever before, right?
Yeah, and look, even Obama, who I'm not a fan of, but Obama was able to push on Iran and get the Iran deal done. Again, that I don't really necessarily like, but the reason we're able to do that, the reason we're able to put sanctions on Russia, the reason we're able to push back in the Middle East on something like Khashoggi being murdered, I'm sure I mispronounced his name, is that we've got the oil in the ground in the U.S. And so this changes our foreign policy. We are less energy independent. Jimmy Carter could have never done sanctions on Russia, push back on Iran, push back on Saudi Arabia, because we didn't have the oil then. And we were terrified of the Middle East, and we needed the oil. Right now, our leaders have more foreign policy levers because we have oil in the U.S. of A.
My last question for you is just to go back to the people directly affected. So you're telling me because of his order to stop the Keystone Pipeline, there were people building this who heard the news and then that's it. Now they're no job. Is that how that goes?
I think a little bit more than that, but basically, there's permits being pulled. There's, materials have been bought. And this is a knee-jerk reaction. Also, just think, if you just take the oil and gas aspect of it out of it, this pulling and pushing on an infrastructure project that's been around for 20 years based on the political winds, I think is a bit foolhardy, and it's going to push future projects in 2030 and 2040 up, because they're going to be worried about, hey, look, what if it gets canceled? Well, I want a little bit more money up front. I want to charge a little bit more because I don't know what the future of this thing is.
The goal should
could go for a road or a bridge or something, not necessarily just a pipeline.
Yeah, we should be getting as much oil out of the ground as we can, as quickly as we can. Quite the opposite today. Dan Eberhardt, canaryusa.com. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me back.
Have a great day. Here is the map of how many pipelines we currently have, right? I think people have this image that this is like the first pipeline we've ever built. There's pipelines all over the country, everywhere. And do you hear about them bursting and exploding and spewing oil and gas all over the place? No. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. Biden's first 100 days. I want to talk about immigration right now. Christopher Hayek is here. He's the Director of Litigation at the Immigration Reform Law Institute. Christopher, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you.
Good to talk to you. Let's talk about, what do you think? We'll start with you. The most egregious or noteworthy executive order that the president signed regarding immigration so far?
Well, one of the most egregious is the moratorium on removing people, deporting people who have final orders of removal pending, against them. There's no basis in law for that at all. In fact, it's contrary to the law, and he gave no explanation for it whatsoever. And that's important in administrative law because you cannot take actions that are arbitrary and capricious. You have to explain why. An agency has to explain why it's doing things. And Chief Justice Roberts made that very clear in some cases involving some of Trump's actions.
Can you take us through maybe a typical case, typical example of what type of person and what they did or what happened that they got to the point where they were ordered to leave and now they're not anymore? What would that look like?
Well, it would be somebody, for example, who was a legal immigrant and committed an aggravated felony involving a sentence of 1 year or more, or a crime of moral turpitude. And they are supposed to be removed from the country. And suddenly they're not, and for no reason. So it could be a public safety threat.
So it's an illegal immigrant who committed a crime, you said, that has a year in prison or more? Yes,
is supposed to be removed from the country.
And now, and is that all the people that would be affected by that, or is that a segment of the people who are affected by this executive order?
It's anybody, any illegal alien who has gone through the process, been found here unlawfully, and ordered removed by a judge.
Wow. So where are they now? Would they still be in prison now, or are they free, you think?
Some of them are in detention, some of them aren't.
I can understand from a progressive's perspective about maybe not continuing with more of these deportations, but the people who are already ordered to be deported, that seems to be the problem, right?
Right, and there are clear cases of people who should be deported under the law. There's nothing, they've been through the whole process. There are no defenses or anything they have left. Wow. And if we're going to have a country at all in borders, we need to have a system of deporting people. It just is absolutely necessary.
Wow. Why a moratorium? And what do you think is coming after the, whatever it is, 60 days?
Well, that's just it. It's there is no explanation for why there's a moratorium. And that's what makes it arbitrary and capricious. In fact, the court in Texas just found that and put a temporary restraining order on this policy. This policy is not in effect because of that.
I read that headline. What did that judge say, and what authority does that judge have over this? Like, why did this judge even hear this case?
Well, because the judge has the authority to interpret federal law, and the judge found provisionally, as an initial matter, that it looks like this violates federal law, and that it's also arbitrary and capricious because there's no reason given for it. And the TRO is in place for a short period of time, and while the parties brief a preliminary injunction, and we will be our group, the Immigration Reform Law Institute, will be filing a brief in that. And if that's granted, then it'll be appealed to the Fifth Circuit.
What do you think Biden, the government, the federal government, Biden's team is going to make? What argument are they going to make? Because they can't, in the court of law, make up, we like illegal immigrants here, right? They can't make a political argument. So what legal argument are they going to make?
Well, they can't make it. They can't come up with any reason that wasn't already given by the agency in the record. The agency actions are judged based on the agency record. Here, there is none at all. So the lawyers are really powerless to come up with any kind of justification post hoc that's going to survive arbitrary and capricious review.
Wow. Can you give me the legal definition of arbitrary and capricious? What does that mean?
Well, to avoid being arbitrary and capricious, you have to engage in reasoned decision making. You have to explain what you're doing and give reasons for it and consider all relevant factors. It's not a very high standard, but arbitrary and capricious a synonym. It's really saying the same thing as crazy or irrational. and a lot of what they want Biden to do and what he's been doing so far is crazy and irrational. And that's actually a legal problem for them.
Let's go to Daca. What is Daca and what has Biden done with this?
Well, he's trying to fortify Daca. The problem is that's not going to affect what Judge Hainan does in Texas. He's soon to decide on whether Daca is lawful or not. And every indication is that he will find that it is not and strike Daca down. And then it'll go to the Fifth Circuit and probably be upheld. Judge Hainan's decision will be upheld there, and it would be upheld or not even reviewed by the Supreme Court. So Daca is left legs.
That seems hopeful then. That's the good news, right? What is Daca? Remind us.
That's blanket prosecutorial discretion, not deporting people who came to this country as children with their parents illegally, and also giving them work authorizations.
So if they get
executive action, and the problem with it is that the president doesn't have that kind of power. As Obama said, this was an Obama program. He said many times before he did it that he didn't have the power to do that. And but then he decided he did, and something very similar he did called DAPA was struck down in the Fifth Circuit, and by Judge Hainan, and the same reasoning applies here. It's an important constitutional question, whether about executive power.
So Biden's executive order he brought it back. Is that what happened? We're going to bring it back, and
he's strengthening it or fortifying it by adding new people and new procedures. But it's not going to matter if the DACA itself is struck down. These new things will not survive either.
Yeah. What did Trump do with DACA over the last 4 years?
Well, he rescinded it, but then that was blocked in the Supreme Court eventually because he didn't, according to Chief Justice Roberts, he didn't explain himself enough. His action in rescinding it was arbitrary and capricious. Now, that was a very divided judgment by the court, and many justices disagreed. But Chief Justice Roberts voted with the liberals, and so Trump's rescission was blocked. But that doesn't affect this case in Texas.
Weird. So what's the constitutionality of DACA that you think it will be overturned if the Supreme Court didn't already overturn it?
Well, an easy argument against DACA is that it is what they call in administrative law a substantive rule. It's a rule telling agents what they have to do. They have to give deferred action to people who meet these criteria, but substantive rules have to go through a public notice and comment process where the public can weigh in and comment on the proposed rule. DACA never went through that process, so it's void. And it would be very easy for Judge Hainan just to find that.
That's not a super high bar, though, right? Because you're saying it still doesn't need to be voted on by anybody. It just needs a public comment process.
Yes, but it's also unlawful for other reasons. It's a failure to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. You can't just have these blanket executive amnesties where you're just refusing to enforce the law. because you don't like it.
Wow. Okay, give me another one. We've got a few minutes here. Give me another one. Let's do the travel ban. What do they call it? Is this the same as the Muslim ban, which wasn't that, obviously? What is Biden's authority with this?
His authority is broader here because these are presidential proclamations that the president issues under a law that gives him discretion to restrict the entry of aliens into the country in the national interest. And that's what Trump did in the travel ban. He said it's not in the national interest for aliens from these countries to come here because it's a national security threat. And so the president has very broad discretion there, and Biden may have a different view of the national interest than Trump.
Okay,
He
but he
doesn't
has
have
the authority
to explain himself as much. It's very hard to argue that he has to explain himself. He's not acting through an agency. When some of these things are implemented through agencies, there might be opportunities for challenge. And my group is going to challenge Biden's actions in the coming months as much as we can. And we would do more if we had more resources. We don't have the hundreds of attorneys or thousands of attorneys and hundreds of groups on the other side that were fighting Trump and trying to stop everything he did in the immigration area.
I wanted to ask you why. Why are you passionate about this? Why are you taking the time to spend your expertise on this issue?
Well, it's a very important issue for the national security and the national interest and the interests of working Americans. It's when you bring in large numbers of immigrants or illegal aliens and they take Americans' jobs, wages are reduced for everybody. This has been a major drive of a major reason why working people's wages in this country have not gone up in real terms since the 1970s, except a little bit under Trump. They started to go up because, if you expand the labor supply, you lower wages. And that's why employers and big business and so forth want this. They don't even mind having illegal aliens because it all drives down wages and they can pay people less. But business and employers don't have to consider the national interest. The president should. And it's wrong to pauperize large segments of the American people.
Last question for you. What is this executive order dealing with the census that Biden signed?
He reversed Trump's exclusion of illegal aliens from the census count for apportionment. The argument there was that that we made was that if only the American people or members of our national political community should be counted in for apportionment, because when you're counted for apportionment, you're given representation in our national government. And people who aren't part of our national political community shouldn't be represented in our national government. But anyway, and the Supreme Court, threw out the suit against Trump's plan, but Biden's just reversing Trump's plan. And, elections have consequences. And of course, the reason he's doing that is it doesn't affect the well-being of illegal aliens or anybody else one way or the other. It just means that Democratic states, being the ones with far more illegal aliens in them, get more representatives and they get more electoral votes. So it's a partisan issue for the Democrats.
Christopher, appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thanks.
Have a great day. More coming up. Biden's first 100 days. Hey, Cider Crusaders, welcome back to our special Biden's first 100 days. So we've talked about his executive orders with oil. We've talked about his executive orders when it comes to immigration. And now I want to talk about the Biden and the progressive worldview when it comes to race and infusing race into everything and what that looks like for the next 4 years. Biden and then also the Kamala Harris presidency to come as well, I'm sure. Here's just an example of Biden the other day.
In the weeks ahead, I'll be reaffirming the federal government's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, building on the work we started in the Obama-Biden administration. That's why I'm rescinding the previous administration's harmful ban on diversity and sensitivity training and abolish the offensive counterfactual 1776 Commission. Unity and healing must begin with understanding and truth, not ignorance and lies.
Geez, there's so much to break down there. Kira Davis is here. She's the editor-at-large at Red State. Kira, how are you?
I'm so confused.
Wait a second. You're the one who's supposed to unconfuse me. What do we do?
I don't know
okay.
what to do, Mike. Actually, we're in for it.
Let's start here. Why will this and their approach, and we'll define their approach in a minute, but why will their approach not lead to unity and healing?
Well, their approach to unity is to completely stomp one side of the conversation. Unity with people who aren't there. That's really what the goal is. Their idea of bridging the divide and creating unity is to completely silence one half of the conversation. And then once that half of the conversation is gone, then it's really easy to unify. I mean, I guess it makes sense if you think about it from the point of view of a brown shirt Democrat.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like this, unity. And the question is, well, do we want unity even? Or especially in the political space, there should be a place for airing our differences and debating them and coming to a compromise.
I say this all the time. Tell me what time in history that you want to point back to that we were like really unified. You know, what is it? America was built on disunity. America was built on disagreeing. Literally, we went to war, and we went to war with ourselves. I mean, we disagreed so much. We had so little unity that we killed each other to the tune of 600,000 lives. So I think that unity is just to placate the masses. It doesn't really mean anything, as we just heard Joe Biden say. I mean, he said a lot of words without really saying anything substantive.
That's right. Let's talk about equity, right? So this one's thrown around a lot, and it's, again, I think it's supposed to like numb us because it sounds good or something. So what is equity as they see it?
I think equity is tipping the scales to benefit a group that they perceive as I don't know, Mike. I'm making this up, just like they are.
No,
this isn't about equity. This isn't about equity. This is about crushing one side of the conversation. This is about making sure that the inroads that President Trump made for the American people are gone forever. They are bound to determine, as we've seen what's happening with big tech, as we've seen what's happening with censorship, they are bound to determine to make sure that another Trump never happens again. And so they want to squash any idea of sort of letting the American voice step forward. It's back to the agenda as usual. Now, I'm not surprised. You know, I'm not wringing my hands over this. Joe Biden was the vice president for 8 years under Obama, and this is all the same stuff that Obama did. This is literally just Obama administration redux with an injection of steroids because they're really rushing to get rid of all of the Trump gains. I think hoping that the American people will forget that all of the stuff that he did.
Yeah, I would argue that this equity is it's this desire for equality of opportunity at the end of the day, and you and I know that's not a thing. I actually have an example of this from the other day.
Equality of outcome, you mean? It's desire for equality
I said
of
opportunity.
outcome.
Excuse me. Thank you. I have an example of this in San Diego. They just passed a law that would allow pot shops to open up in different parts of the county. But if you've had a previous marijuana arrest or incarceration, you go to the front of the line for the permits, which is interesting, right? Because the idea is that black and brown people have been disproportionately discriminated against because of marijuana laws. So therefore, we need present discrimination against everyone else. And now you get more because of, and that's equity. Does that make sense?
No, none of it makes sense. We have the same thing here in California with this vaccine rollout, right? I've got a friend who lives on my street who's in her 30s. She has cystic fibrosis. She's at the back of the line for the vaccine. Who's at the front of the line? Rapists and murderers, felons, people in prison are at the front of the line. And also the tree canopy for some reason is important in how we're distributing the vaccine. So if you have too many, I swear people, this is the God's honest truth. If you have too many trees, or if you have a lot of trees in your neighborhood, the state of California says, like, well, you're affluent, so you don't need the vaccine. If you have very few trees in your neighborhood, they're going to say, okay, you live in a poor neighborhood, you get bumped to the front of the line with the vaccine. But it's all this is just tinkering with stuff. It's just tinkering with the apparatus, the mechanics of society. It's just tinkering with human nature. It's completely ignoring the reality. It's governing the rule. It's governing the world the way you wish it could be, not the way that it is. And I would have to say that the thing that disturbs me the most is not these rollbacks and executive orders. I think the thing that disturbs me the most is the language that Joe Biden uses, particularly when he's discussing the 1776 Commission. There is this massive effort, again, here we go with equity and unity, this massive effort to paint everybody right of center as a Nazi, as a threat, as a danger. The 1776 Commission it's not full of lies or misinformation or falsehoods. It might be a different approach that you don't like, that you don't think we should take, but it's actually a historical approach to the actual historical factual founding of this nation. That's what disturbs me the most, is the language they're using to describe some of the things that Americans who identify as right of center believe.
Yeah, to shut it down. To go back to your first point, real quick, just for everyone who doesn't live in California like Kira and I do, it is you go to healthyplacesindex.org, and you can see a list of all the metrics that they use to determine your affluence and therefore who should get the vaccine first. And she's indeed right, of course. Tree canopy cover is one of the many absurd metrics that go into this stupid state. Okay, so if you want to see it, healthyplacesindex.org. So 1776 project.
We got to recall this governor, Mike. We got to recall this governor, by the way.
Kira, we'll save this for another day. I wasn't on the recall bandwagon for a bunch of reasons. I'm no fan of Newsom, don't get me wrong. But I'm on it now. I'm on the bandwagon, sign me up. So I think we're going to get it, which is pretty exciting. So 1776 project. So what's so bizarre is the 1776 project is how we've always taught history, right? Up until 2 years ago. And now it's characterized as like this crazy, far right, alt-right, wingnut stuff that's coming. Like what's happening here?
That's what's scary is even to have a flag, to put a flag, a pin on, or to have a flag on your shirt or your hat, even that has come to symbolize sort of right-wing fanaticism. We just live in crazy times, absolutely. And the worst part about this to me is the avenues through which we combat these very unfair and frankly unintelligent descriptions of the 1776 project and what people on the right think. The avenues for us to combat those publicly are getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's by design too. So everything from 1776 project to reversing Trump's transgender policy and immigration, all of this is aimed at putting the kill shot in the right. I think at the end of the day, that's all this is. I couldn't believe, Mike, after we finally got this election over with, the liberals won, the left won, they won everything. And they're still mad. They're still angry. They're still bitter. Why? Because they couldn't believe that even still 75 million people voted for Trump. They couldn't believe that people existed in this country, that 2016 had to have been a mistake. It was supposed to be Hillary. It was a terrible mistake. Now we're back to normal. We're back to regular. And clearly all of these people realized that, Trump was just no good. And all of a sudden they realized, 75 million people still voted for him? They're angry that we even exist. And that's dangerous. I think the Democrats are going to overplay their hand here again, which is how we got Trump the first time. My fear is that the next guy that comes in is going to make Trump look like a teddy bear.
No, I think that's 100% right. Yeah, you're so right. Like the 75 million, you're right. In their world, in their MSNBC world, there literally should have been no one who voted for Trump. Right? Anyone above a single person who voted is outrageous that anyone could be so horrible of a person. And we live amongst them, and they're everywhere, Kira. They teach your children. They work at your hospitals. They work at the grocery store, right? They need to root out domestic terrorists. Domestic terrorists, right? What do we do with that, Kira? How do we proceed when we are now described as domestic terrorists?
It's difficult, and it's actually a bit of a scary time. I know at Red State, we've been struggling with just trying to stay online because the censors are so harsh on Facebook and Twitter, and even for the people that host our platforms, that we're having to go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. We don't like it, but that's the way it is right now, so we can stay alive, so we can fight the war. But we got to get through this battle first. How do we get through this battle first? Well, I think we keep doing stuff like this, Mike, what you and I are doing. You know, we keep doing our shows. We keep talking to people. I have a podcast, Just Listen to Yourself, with Kira Davis. And on that podcast, I don't really talk about politics a lot. I talk about critical thinking. And I ask people to think through their talking points. And I think that when we encourage people to think through their talking points, to engage in some critical thinking, to realize that sometimes what you're saying, what you think you're saying, isn't exactly what you are saying. I think when we encourage more people to do that, we'll make more people at least more sensitive to the idea of tolerating the other half of the country that's here. The other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that for those of us who still have voices in social media, that we're standing up, that we're shouting out, that we're saying what we can, where we can. I do believe this will blow over. I also believe very passionately still, even after the disaster of that election, I still believe that at the end of the day, the voice of the American people will speak in one way or another. And that's what the Democrats cannot abide by. And that's what they need to crush. That's why they are crushing the very spirit and foundation of the American dream in the 1776 Project. And all of the traditional beliefs that we hold dear. It is an attempt to silence half the country. But we are still here, and every time we pop up, they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe these people exist in our country. It's like a big surprise that half the country is conservative. But half the country has always been conservative. This is the cycle of politics. This is what really annoys me about this. These people don't live in reality. Do we face racism? Do we face sexism? Do we face these things? Sure, absolutely. Let's talk about those things. But guess what? The Democrats aren't talking about those things. That's not really what they're talking about. What they're talking about is making sure that half of us don't ever have a say in public life again.
I love that hopeful note at the end, and I love the name Just Listen to Yourself. That's a great podcast name. Real Kira Davis on the Twitter. Thanks, Kira. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Mike.
Keep it up, editor at large at Red State. And then I can be followed at MikeSlater.locals.com. That's our special. We'll see you again. Mike Slater, spread the word.